Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that the most powerful man in the Middle East, a man who spent years building a friendship with Washington, who danced with American presidents, who signed trillion-dollar deals with Wall Street, had quietly, secretly begun the most dangerous nuclear pivot in modern history. Not toward America, not toward Europe, but toward Pakistan. And the reason he did it will shake everything you thought you knew about global power. This is not a rumor. This is not speculation. The intelligence reports, the satellite imagery, the diplomatic cables, they all point to the same conclusion. Saudi Arabia, under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, is executing a master plan so bold, so calculated, and so consequential that it threatens to rewrite the entire security architecture of the Middle East. And Washington is only now beginning to understand what it has already lost. The men inside the Pentagon who track these movements, the analysts inside Langley who read the intercepts, the senior diplomats who have spent careers managing America's Gulf relationships, they are all looking at the same picture right now, and the picture is terrifying. But to truly understand what MBS is doing and why he is doing it right now, in this exact moment, you need to understand the firestorm that is currently consuming the Gulf. Because the war between Iran and its neighbors, a war that exploded in the last few weeks with terrifying speed, is not just background noise to this story. It is the exact reason this story is happening. The chaos you are watching in the Gulf is the fuel that is powering MBS's most dangerous gamble. And by the time this video is over, you will understand why the world may never look the same again. Stay with me, because the biggest revelation in this story comes at the very end, and it will change how you see everything. For the last several years, the Middle East existed in a fragile, uneasy state of managed tension. Iran and Saudi Arabia had signed a Chinese-brokered normalization agreement in 2023 that shocked the world. The two rivals, who had spent decades funding proxy wars, trading accusations, and building competing spheres of influence, had shaken hands. Embassies reopened. Trade talks began. The headlines called it a historic breakthrough. Commentators on every major network declared that a new era of Middle Eastern stability had arrived. Academic papers were written about the dawn of Gulf diplomacy. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. But underneath that diplomatic veneer, the mistrust never went away. Iran never stopped enriching uranium. Iran never stopped arming the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Iraqi militias. Iran never stopped its ballistic missile development program, which it expanded dramatically even during the normalization period. And MBS never stopped watching Tehran with the cold, calculating eyes of a man who knows that a handshake is not a guarantee. He signed the deal. He reopened the embassy. And he quietly kept building. Then came the moment that broke everything. When the U.S.-Israel military campaign against Iran's nuclear infrastructure was launched, it did not just destroy centrifuges and underground bunkers. It destroyed the fiction of Middle Eastern stability. It sent a message to every government in the region. The rules have changed. The old arrangements are over. Every nation must now decide how it will protect itself, because the security environment that existed last year no longer exists today. The quiet agreements, the informal understandings, the gentlemen's arrangements between regional powers, all of it evaporated in the heat of those first strikes. Iran's response was not the measured, calibrated retaliation of a nation trying to avoid wider war. It was the response of a regime that had been humiliated, whose nuclear program, decades in the making, funded through immense national sacrifice, had been crippled in a matter of days. Iran struck back not just at Israel, it struck at the Gulf. It struck at the neighbors who it believed had quietly supported, tolerated, or looked the other way, while American and Israeli jets used regional airspace to launch their campaign. And it struck with a ferocity that caught even the most pessimistic analysts off guard. The strikes on Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial city were the moment that genuinely terrified the global economy. Ras Laffan is not just an industrial zone. It is the beating heart of the world's liquid natural gas supply. At least 20% of the LNG that heats homes in Europe, powers factories in Asia, and fuels electricity grids across the developing world passes through or originates from that complex. When the fires started burning at Ras Laffan, when the explosions lit up the Qatari night sky, energy traders in London and Singapore and New York stared at their screens in disbelief. Brent crude, already elevated from weeks of mounting tension, surged past $115 per barrel within hours. By the next morning, it was approaching $119. Analysts who had been warning about energy shock scenarios for months were suddenly being asked to appear on every major financial network because those scenarios were no longer theoretical. They were live. They were on fire. And the markets were only beginning to process what it meant. But Ras Laffan was only one front. Iranian ballistic missiles and drones struck the UAE in a wave that stunned defense planners who had spent tens of billions of dollars on air defense systems. More than 2,000 projectiles, a combination of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and armed drones, were launched at UAE territory in the days following the initial escalation. Dubai International Airport, once the single busiest aviation hub on the entire planet, was temporarily shut down after a drone incident that sent shockwaves through the global aviation and logistics industry. Abu Dhabi's gas infrastructure sustained serious damage. Insurance underwriters stopped issuing new coverage for flights into the region. Airlines began rerouting their long-haul services, adding hours and thousands of dollars in fuel costs to routes that had previously been routine. The image of smoke rising over the skyline of one of the world's most modern, most carefully constructed cities was broadcast on every television screen on the planet. And what it communicated was not just military threat. It communicated vulnerability. It communicated that no amount of money, no amount of technology, and no amount of American military hardware had made these cities truly safe. And then came Riyadh. Iran struck the Saudi capital with ballistic missiles at a moment of almost theatrical cruelty. 12 Arab and Islamic foreign ministers were gathered in Riyadh at that very moment, desperately trying to find a diplomatic path away from total war. They were sitting in meeting rooms, crafting statements, debating de-escalation frameworks, when the air raid sirens began. They were rushed into bunkers while missiles targeted the city they had gathered in to seek peace. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. Iran was not just attacking Saudi infrastructure. Iran was sending a message to the entire Arab world. There is no diplomacy here. There is no neutral ground. There is no safe room. You are either with us or you are our target. The message landed with unmistakable clarity, and every leader in every Arab capital received it. The Saudi foreign minister emerged from the crisis with a statement that stopped the diplomatic world cold. He declared that the kingdom reserves the right to military action and that Iran must immediately recalculate its strategy. Those words, spoken by a diplomat in the careful language of international affairs, translated into something much simpler. The old relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran is permanently over, and Saudi Arabia is now thinking about war in a way it has never publicly acknowledged before. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes every single day, became effectively a war zone. Iranian naval forces, mines, and the constant threat of missile attack transformed one of the most critical maritime choke points in human history into a passage that no commercial tanker captain was willing to risk without extraordinary insurance, extraordinary naval escort, and extraordinary luck. Reports confirmed that approximately 500 oil tankers were trapped in the Gulf, unable to move in either direction. Qatar Energy, Kuwait Petroleum, and ADNOC, three of the most powerful and strategically important energy companies on Earth, all declared force majeure. In plain language, the oil stops, the gas stops, the contracts are void, the supply chain is broken. In global financial markets, the reaction was immediate, severe, and self-reinforcing. Stock markets across Asia, Europe, and the United States entered correction territory within days of the Hormuz crisis escalating. The energy sector initially surged while everything else collapsed. Shipping insurance costs for Gulf voyages became effectively prohibitive for most commercial operators. Freight costs exploded across all categories, not just energy. And for developing economies, including Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Egypt, and dozens of African and Southeast Asian nations that depend on Gulf energy imports and Gulf remittances, the economic pain was not abstract. It was showing up in fuel prices at petrol stations. It was showing up in electricity blackouts. It was showing up in the inflation numbers that central banks were scrambling to respond to. And it was going to get worse before it got better, because nobody, not the UN, not the United States, not China, had a credible plan to stop it. Now here is where the story takes the turn that most people are missing entirely. While the world was watching the fires in Qatar, the missiles over Riyadh, the drones above Dubai, while every analyst and anchor and think tank, and that lesson is brutal in its simplicity, military deterrence is the only language that guarantees survival in this region. Everything else, diplomacy, normalization agreements, economic interdependence, American security guarantees, is a story you tell yourself until the missiles start falling. Saudi Arabia has the wealthiest sovereign wealth fund in the world. It has American F-15 fighter jets. It has Patriot air defense batteries. It has THAAD missile interceptors. It has American military trainers embedded in its defense establishment. It spends more on its military as a percentage of GDP than almost any nation on Earth. And yet, Iranian missiles still landed in Riyadh. Iranian drones still penetrated Gulf airspace. The American security umbrella, the foundational promise that standing with Washington means you are protected, turned out to have gaps in it large enough for ballistic missiles to fly through. The 2019 Aramco attack, in which Iranian-linked drones struck the heart of Saudi oil infrastructure and briefly cut the kingdom's oil output in half in a single morning, was the original wake-up call. That attack happened on America's watch, with American troops in the region, with American satellites overhead. The response from Washington was hesitant, measured, and ultimately symbolic. Troops were sent, statements were issued, and then nothing changed. Iran paid no price that altered its behavior. And MBS never forgot it. He filed that lesson away and began building toward a different kind of answer. So what does a man like MBS do when he concludes that conventional military alliances and American security guarantees are insufficient to protect his kingdom against an adversary with ballistic missiles, drone swarms, proxy militias across 4 countries, and a proven willingness to use all of them? What does the leader of the Arab world's most powerful and most oil-dependent state do when he realizes that the only true deterrence in the 21st century, the only thing that makes an adversary genuinely hesitate before attacking, is nuclear deterrence? He calls Islamabad. Think about that for a moment. The crown prince of the wealthiest Arab nation on earth, a man with F-15s and Patriot batteries and the full catalog of American military hardware, concludes that none of it is enough. He looks at what just happened to his capital city. He looks at the fires still burning in Qatar. He looks at the drones circling over Dubai. He looks at 500 tankers sitting motionless in the Gulf. And he picks up the phone and calls the one country on earth that has both a nuclear arsenal and a documented decades-long financial relationship with the Saudi state. He calls the country that has quietly understood for 30 years that its nuclear capability was partly made possible by Saudi money. He calls Islamabad, and this time the conversation is not vague. It is not hypothetical. It is operational. The relationship between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan's nuclear program is one of the worst kept secrets in global security. It stretches back to the 1970s. Pakistan's nuclear weapons development was substantially funded by Saudi petrodollars during the years when Khan was building the program and the Pakistani state was pouring every resource it had into becoming a nuclear power. The arrangement was never spoken about in official communiques, but it was understood by every serious intelligence analyst on every continent. Saudi Arabia funded the bomb, and in return, Saudi Arabia expected that if it ever needed access to that deterrent, Pakistan would provide it. Former Pakistani Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto explicitly described the financial dimensions of this arrangement in interviews before her assassination. Western intelligence agencies have tracked it for 3 decades. It has never been a secret. It has simply been an arrangement that everyone preferred not to discuss at official levels. But what MBS is pursuing right now is different in kind and different in urgency from anything that came before. It is not the vague, implicit understanding of the Cold War era. It is not a gentleman's agreement between foreign ministers over dinner. What MBS is now constructing is a formal, operational, structured nuclear security arrangement with Pakistan, one that is designed to provide Saudi Arabia with credible nuclear deterrence against Iran within a defined timeline. And the current geopolitical catastrophe unfolding in the Gulf is simultaneously the trigger, the justification, and the political cover for doing it openly. Here is what the intelligence picture actually looks like, based on what has been confirmed or credibly reported by serious analytical outlets and defense journals over the last 18 months. Saudi Arabia has dramatically accelerated its civilian nuclear program, constructing reactors with Chinese technical assistance that give it the physical and human infrastructure to move toward independent enrichment capability if it chooses. This is not a secret. Saudi officials have discussed it publicly. More importantly, Saudi officials, including MBS himself, have stated explicitly on camera in international interviews that if Iran develops or reconstitutes a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia will seek one. That statement was treated by many Western commentators as posturing. It was not posturing, it was a declaration of intent delivered with the calm confidence of a man who already knows what his options are and has already begun exercising them. Simultaneously, Pakistan is undergoing its own deep strategic reassessment. The country that once relied almost entirely on the United States as its primary great power patron has spent the last decade watching that relationship deteriorate sharply, while American ties to New Delhi deepened and American policy toward South Asia shifted fundamentally. Pakistan's military establishment, which exercises ultimate control over the country's nuclear arsenal regardless of which civilian government is in office, has been searching for a new geopolitical architecture that provides Pakistan with both strategic security and the economic oxygen it desperately needs. Saudi Arabia, with its sovereign wealth fund, its oil wealth, its proven willingness to provide emergency economic support to Islamabad during currency crises, and its strategic weight in the Islamic world, looks extraordinarily attractive to Pakistani generals who are thinking about the next 20 to 30 years. The financial dimensions of this relationship are not subtle. Saudi Arabia has directed billions of dollars into Pakistan over the last 5 years through central bank deposits, deferred oil payment arrangements that provide Pakistan with critical import financing, and large-scale direct investment pledges across energy, real estate, and infrastructure. In 2023, when Pakistan was teetering on the edge of a sovereign debt default that could have triggered social collapse, it was Saudi money that provided the critical stabilizing injection that bought Islamabad the time it needed to reach an IMF agreement. That financial intervention was not charity. It was a relationship being deepened. It was a ledger being filled. And on that ledger, Pakistan's nuclear capabilities occupy a very specific and very important line item. Multiple credible assessments, including those referenced in serious Western defense and foreign policy journals, have documented discussions between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan about what analysts call a nuclear umbrella arrangement. The precise operational architecture of this arrangement remains in the classified domain, but its broad outline is visible to any analyst who is paying attention. In exchange for Saudi economic support, investment, and political backing, Pakistan would provide Saudi Arabia with access to a nuclear deterrent in one form or another, whether through the forward deployment of Pakistani nuclear-capable delivery systems on Saudi territory, through a formal mutual defense treaty with explicit nuclear dimensions, or through a hybrid arrangement that achieves deterrence without crossing the formal legal thresholds that would trigger immediate international sanctions. The Iranians are watching this, the Israelis are watching this, and finding it deeply alarming for reasons that go beyond the obvious. The Indians are watching this with acute concern, given that Pakistan's nuclear assets are currently calibrated for the India-Pakistan deterrence equation, and any reorientation of those assets toward Gulf security introduces new uncertainties into South Asian nuclear stability. And the Americans, particularly the professionals within the Pentagon, the State Department, and the intelligence community, are watching this with a level of institutional alarm that has not yet fully translated into coherent public policy, but which is genuinely, urgently real. Now consider the full strategic picture that MBS has assembled. The Abraham Accords, the U.S. brokered normalization deals between Israel and Arab states, were always built with Saudi-Israel normalization as the crown jewel, the final prize that would cement American influence in the region for a generation. Washington invested enormous diplomatic capital, senior attention, and significant implicit security commitments in pursuit of that goal, and MBS used the prospect of that deal as extraordinary leverage. He extracted from Washington promises of security guarantees, advanced weapons transfers, and American support for Saudi civilian nuclear development, all in exchange for the possibility, not even the certainty, just the possibility, of moving toward Israel. He never fully committed. He kept Washington hungry. And now the political space for a Saudi-Israel deal has been consumed by the war, by the Arab anger at Israeli military operations, by Iranian missiles landing on Arab soil. The deal is gone, and with it, Washington's primary source of leverage over Riyadh. Which means MBS is, for the first time in a generation, genuinely free to pursue the Pakistan arrangement without the constraint of American approval or American pressure. Free to deepen the China relationship that has already delivered more tangible diplomatic results in the Middle East in the last 3 years than Washington managed in 30. Free to construct a Saudi-led regional security architecture that does not depend on, is not subordinate to, and does not require the permission of the United States of America. This is the Masterplan. It was not assembled overnight. It was not triggered by the current crisis. It has been building for years, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, through every weapons deal and every bailout and every carefully worded official statement. The current crisis has not created the master plan. It has simply accelerated the execution, given it public justification, and made it politically impossible for anyone to credibly argue that Saudi Arabia should wait any longer. But let us be clear about the scale of what is at stake, because this story does not end in the Gulf. The implications of what MBS is building stretch to every corner of the global system. If Saudi Arabia achieves a credible nuclear deterrence arrangement through Pakistan, the nuclear non-proliferation regime, already under severe stress from North Korea, from Iran's pre-crisis enrichment program, from the erosion of arms control architecture globally, effectively collapses in the world's most strategically sensitive region. Because if Saudi Arabia has nuclear cover, Egypt will seek it, Turkey, already operating an assertively independent foreign policy, will want it. The UAE will want it. Jordan will feel exposed. The entire architecture of international arms control, painstakingly constructed over 70 years at enormous diplomatic cost, will shatter in the region that the entire global economy depends on most. And for global markets, for global energy supply chains, for the long-term economic models that governments and corporations and pension funds use to plan their futures, this means permanent structural instability in the region that produces the majority of the world's exportable oil and a substantial share of its natural gas. The Strait of Hormuz will never again be simply a shipping lane. It will be a nuclear flashpoint. Every oil price forecast, every energy security investment decision, every long-term inflation model will have to be rebuilt around the recognition that the Middle East is now a multi-nuclear zone with deep, ancient, unresolved conflicts and modern weapon systems capable of reaching every major city on Earth. The current crisis, devastating as it is a preview. It is a warning shot from history. Brent crude at $119, 500 tankers trapped in the Gulf, 3 of the world's largest energy companies declaring force majeure, stock markets in correction. This is what a conventional conflict in the Gulf looks like. The version of this crisis with nuclear dimensions, with nuclear-armed states making ultimatums, with the Strait of Hormuz as a nuclear tripwire rather than merely a military choke point. That version has consequences that no economic model has ever been built to absorb. And the United States is watching this happen with a combination of strategic alarm and effective impotence that represents one of the defining failures of American foreign policy in the post-Cold War period. The tools that Washington would normally deploy, sanctions pressure, conditionality on weapons sales, diplomatic isolation, the withdrawal of security guarantees, all carry catastrophic costs in an environment where Saudi oil production is one of the last remaining buffers against a complete global energy emergency. You cannot sanction the country whose production decisions are the only thing standing between the world economy and a $200 oil price. You simply cannot. Through all of it, MBS is watching and waiting with the patience of a man who knows that history is moving in his direction. Every Iranian missile that lands on Arab soil is another argument for why Saudi Arabia cannot afford to remain without ultimate deterrence. Every American hesitation is another confirmation that Washington cannot be relied upon. Every Chinese investment, every Pakistani military engagement, every financial lifeline extended to Islamabad is another brick in the architecture of a new regional order that does not have Washington at its center. Here is the final truth that ties everything together. The moment Saudi Arabia achieves a credible nuclear deterrence arrangement, the moment Islamabad and Riyadh formalize what has long been informal, the Middle East that existed for the last 70 years is permanently gone. The oil monarchies will no longer be clients of American power. They will be independent strategic actors with the ultimate weapon. And the rules that governed great power competition in the Gulf, the rules that prevented local catastrophes from becoming global ones, will have to be completely rewritten by people who have no template, no precedent, and no guarantee of getting it right. We are not there yet, but we are closer than we have ever been. And the fires burning in Qatar, the missiles over Riyadh, the tankers trapped in Hormuz, the stock markets falling in New York, they're not just a crisis, they're a countdown clock. And the hands are moving faster than anyone in Washington is ready to admit. MBS's Masterplan is already in motion. The question is not whether Saudi Arabia will abandon the American security umbrella. The question is whether America even realizes it already has. And if history is any guide, Washington will understand this moment only after it is far too late to change it. That is the real story. That is the real danger. And now you know it.